delving into the depths of human memory. The land on which mankind walks has always been barren, poor, and devoid of the spark of hope for unfettered growth. Yet despite this, it managed to nourish its children. However, the greed and exploitation of the human population became so great that the green meadows, crystal clear waters, and dense forests became a faint memory, as fleeting as the low-hanging sun over the desert steppe. As these food sources withered away, wild animals began to die out, unable to compete with the growing machine of exploitation. Claws, fangs, and thick fur stood no chance against steel and stone. Standing on the brink of collapse, humanity did not stop in this mad place. Flexing its muscles, it pushed further and further, and when there was no more food for cows, horses, and pigs, hard times ensued, shaping the present day. Now, rats, cockroaches, and other disgusting insects reign supreme. Even dogs and cats exist only in stories that, for the younger generations, sound like unreal fairy tales told by their parents at bedtime. Humans had to put their trust in technology, the very thing that had first driven them to the brink of ruin. Today, those who can afford it travel in mechanical creatures known as automobiles, powered by steam, coal, and oil. But this privilege is only for the wealthy, fortunate enough to live in the heart of the civilized world. Even if someone dared to bring wheels and steel to the furthest reaches of the empire, they would soon run out of fuel, especially in Assyria. That's why the three men took turns pulling the modified cart, on which Everett Yeager lay feverish. The gang leader might have been as strong as the aurochs of legend, as brave as the tiger of myth, but even he had to give life its due, and in this case, that meant blood and a hand. The man was in agony, half-conscious as he stared at the makeshift bandage on his stump, wrapped in a worn cloth, soaked with a red, dirty liquid. Every so often, Daniel Sills gave Everett a sip of sharp liquor while urging John or Marvin to work harder. Lost in their frenzied haste, they had long since lost track of time. They didn't know whether minutes or hours had passed since the unexpected attack. They only knew they had half a day's journey ahead, now half a night's, to reach the tall, bare trees signaling the location of the witch's hut. If anyone could help in this tragic, unprecedented situation, it was the dark-skinned sorceress named Shelby White. No one knew her true surname, and the nickname White came from her long, gleaming white dreadlocks that reached down to her waist. She also had distinct chalk-white eyes and wore a necklace of snow-white human bones. People whispered that the witch could communicate with the dead, seeking from their wisdom new spells that had long been forgotten by the modern inhabitants of these barren lands. At dawn, she would make a Thanksgiving sacrifice, lightly cutting her left wrist, and at midnight, she brewed potions from which black smoke would rise from the chimney, forming a graphite column visible for miles on windless days. But today, no one would have noticed the column of smoke, as the wind performed its own ritual, lifting particles of so-called blood sand into the air. It howled, roared, whispered, and deceived. The atmosphere thickened and grew more unsettling as Yeager, delirious with fever, mumbled and talked to himself. He now resembled a sorcerer or some apostate conversing with wicked spirits. None of his men were sure if he would live to see the next day. The thought crossed their minds to put Everett out of his misery and abandon the rescue mission, but one uncertainty kept them in check. They feared that any one of them, knowingly or not, might, in time, reveal this bitter, dangerous secret. And then the wrath, especially from the son of a murdered man, would reach them even at the ends of the earth. So, they took turns pushing and pulling the cart that bounced on the uneven terrain. Finally, one of them spotted black fields on the horizon, resembling enormous waves crashing onto a shoreline. Marvin had seen the black forest, woven from dried-up trees. From afar, With the right perspective, one could mistake these dead monuments of nature for matchsticks stuck into the ground with charred heads. At that moment, the cowboy realized that the storm had once again left Assyria and its surroundings, revealing to the bandits a winding, well-trodden sandy path leading deeper into the valley, which at one point forked in opposite directions. Following the right path would lead to the infamous farm, where Jaeger's ruthless gang resided. But without hesitation, the three scoundrels took the left path, heading toward the edge of the mentioned forest, where the mysterious witch with an unknown past lived. The woman, dressed in scraps of rat fur that barely covered her slim, athletic body, was just stepping out of her hut, carrying a wooden tray filled with a boiled soup that contained all manner of impurities expelled from the human body. It was the final stage of a cleansing ritual. Upon seeing the familiar face of John Marlowe, who had decided to step forward, Shelby grew furious. She hurled the tray to the ground, and the filthy, foul-smelling water splashed onto the dry, cracked earth. The woman hated being interrupted during her rituals. This was her sacred time, and not even Everett himself had the audacity to disturb her peace.
I told you before.
The witch glanced over John's shoulder and froze, seeing the dying Jaeger, whose groans first drew her attention. She quickly pulled herself together and pushed the silent Marlowe out of the way. She rushed to see the unfortunate man with her own eyes. She couldn't believe that someone like him, Everett Jaeger, the terror of Assyria, was now fighting for his life.
By the dead gods, what happened?
She almost shouted.
There's no time for foolish stories. Too much has happened, and we ourselves don't fully understand what's going on. The only thing that matters now is this. Can you help him?
Sills responded, holding his boss's severed hand and the cane with golden embellishments, which trembled, stirred by magic.
I don't know yet. Take him to my hut. I'll try to help, but hurry. Time is against us.
The cowboys quickly lifted Jaeger into their arms and carried him to the humble-looking hut, which, inside, turned out to be richly adorned. From the moment they entered, they were greeted by a barrage of intense scents. They couldn't identify all the herbs and spices. There were so many in the air that it took them a while before they could breathe freely without irritating coughs. Human skulls hung on the walls, and shelves groaned under the weight of mysterious potions. In the corner stood a cauldron bubbling with a rotten green liquid. Amid the trinkets, baubles, and various decorations were candles and oil lamps, casting an orange glow that effectively combated the gloom. Daniel Sills, the eldest of the men, with a noticeable mohawk and sideburns dyed indigo, carefully watched Shelby's movements as she bustled around. Of all three, he was the only one who didn't trust the witch. He tolerated her only because she was favored by Jaeger, and now he had to watch as she was the one attempting to save his boss's life. It pained him deeply, that feeling of helplessness. The witch pulled out some tools from a shelf, a thin, small knife, a saw, a larger candle, several bandages, as well as a flammable ointment, a mysterious homemade gel, and substances with properties unknown to the men. The only thing Daniel could distinguish were their colors: blue, emerald, black, red, and silvery. It was an entire palette of hues.
Damn it!
Shelby shouted.
What's wrong?
Marvin asked, who until now had been unable to find a place for himself, bouncing like a ball against the walls of the hut.
What's wrong? You ask what's wrong. You dressed the wound so poorly that red sand got into his bloodstream. That will make saving him much harder.
The witch snapped irritably as she poured gel over the exposed, bleeding wound and brought the candle flame closer to it.
What are you doing?
The distrustful Sills yelled.
Don't interrupt me. I'm fixing what you broke.
In an instant, the flame consumed the sticky substance, simultaneously burning the exposed flesh. The stump of the right hand turned into a torch, glowing with a blue light for a few seconds. Jaeger, though unconscious, awoke from his stupor and let out a terrifying howl, sounding like a wild, untamed beast from legends and myths. He began to thrash about, kicking and tossing equipment across the floor.
Are you just going to stand there? Help me hold him down. I'm not finished.
The gang members rushed to help. They grabbed their overheated, enraged boss by the shoulders and legs. They struggled to keep him in place, and the witch had to hurry, knowing her companions wouldn't be able to hold on for long. She needed just a bit of peace to complete her work. Carefully, she used tweezers to remove the larger clumps of dried sand from the wound, assisting herself with the delicate, thin knife. Then, racing against time, she sprinkled the burned wound with powdered herbs and set it aflame again. This time, a golden flame burst forth, and the sand, remnants of the sandstorm, heated to a glowing red. It looked like burning coals. John watched in horror as tiny sparks ignited under Jaeger's skin, like magical fireflies that, until now, had lain dormant within the man's body, suddenly coming to life. At that moment, the gang leader let out an even louder, more powerful scream. He could have drowned out the roar of a departing locomotive. All those present, including Shelby, felt as if the hut, made from thick wooden beams, was shaking to its very foundations. The cane lying nearby, one of the divine echoes, began to tremble and tap the floor once again. Without wasting time, Shelby lit some dried rare herbs and began blowing the rising smoke toward the exposed stump. Silver tendrils, resembling spilled ink in water, wrapped around the charred flesh and protruding bone. The dark matter, like a hand from the abyss, clenched tightly, stopping the last rush of blood escaping from the dying body. In the meantime, Jaeger's screams subsided, and he became cold and distant. He looked as if he were truly dead.
"What have you done?"
Marvin asked, panic evident in his voice.
I've almost saved his life.
She replied, exhausted, as if she had run the distance to Assyria and back.
"Almost? Almost? Are you kidding?"
Rupert said angrily.
To save him, I need to speak with the dead. You all need to leave.
We're not going anywhere.
Daniel said, supporting his comrade. The whole situation was making him increasingly uneasy.
We can argue until morning, but we have no other choice. The dead won't speak to me if you're present. This hut, this place, is sacred to them, and in holy ground they only talk when they wish. With you here, they won't say a word.
You don't have our permission to...
Sills raised his voice, but quickly cut himself off, feeling John's hand on his shoulder.
Witches may be crazy, but they know their craft,
Marlowe said, who at that moment didn't seem like himself. Through that small, very small crack in time, he appeared as a conscious and intelligent man. Perhaps that's what made the others relent, and the three of them left the hut.
At last,
the witch whispered, taking 2 black shiny spheres from her pouch.
May you hear my plea.
She crushed the 2 mysterious objects between her fingers. A foul-smelling goo spread across her hand. Shelby smeared it over her lips and cheeks. The narcotic quickly took hold of her. She felt as if, with every breath, milky vapor formed magical images of ancient gods in the air. The world began to spin around her. She heard voices and whispers of people who had long left this world. As time passed, the hut seemed to expand from the perspective of the dark-skinned woman, swallowing more and more space and giving the impression that both she and her patient were in a vast void, surrounded by the shadows of those who had passed. The apparitions muttered, advised, judged, and some mocked or cursed the living who dared to peek into the realm of death. Finally, within her vision, the witch heard one distinct voice.
Kiss him.
And so she did. She pressed her lips to the unconscious Jaegers, and the onyx goo slowly dripped down, staining his beard. Suddenly, she felt a jolt. Moments later, she couldn't breathe. Someone was gripping her throat, taking her life away. "You've done well, witch," said the awakened Jaeger, looking at her with unexpected strength in his eyes.